Hi, and welcome to the session. Before we begin, the Toronto Comic Art Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of the land where TCAF is situated, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. The Toronto Comics Art Festival is located in a territory that is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for the land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. This acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land and is an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationships with Indigenous communities in Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming in 2022 and beyond. I'm Matthew, one of the coordinators for Libraries and Education Day this year. I'm a librarian in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and Stolo people.
And I'm Lauren, the other coordinator for Libraries and Education Day this year. I'm a librarian in Los Angeles, California, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Tongva, Chumash, Fernandinho, and Kizh that is now occupied by Los Angeles.
Regardless of where you are right now, we ask you to take a moment today between sessions and consider the land, the history, and the people who have lived there in the past and who live there now.
And welcome to the Let's Talk, Draw About Sex, Comics and Sex Education. We will be joined by moderator Denny Park and panelist Rakisha Kearns-White and Corey Silverberg. Denny Park is a genderqueer Korean settler who has worked in circulation and helped create outreach events for the University of Waterloo Library. They also have volunteered doing sexual health and gender diversity education and outreach. Denny is finishing their library and information tech diploma and is currently working as an Access support worker for the Access CBC program as a transcription developer for the webcomic Oh Joy Sex Toy. Raised in the 1970s by a children's librarian and a sex therapist, Corey Silverberg grew up to be a sex educator, an author, and a queer person who smiles a lot when they talk. They spend a lot of their time reading, writing, and talking about sex and gender, and are happiest working with others. Corey was a founding member of the Come As You Are cooperative and worked as a researcher and television consultant in Canada for over 10 years. Corey is a core team member of Anti-Up, a virtual professional freedom school founded by Bianca I. Loreno. They also spend a lot of time helping other people make books. Rakisha Kearns-White is a sex-positive, BTS-loving, and period equity advocate with 17 years at the Brooklyn Public Library as a young adult librarian. During her time, Rakisha has earned the nickname as the puberty librarian because of her dedication in offering puberty and sexuality education workshops for tweens and teens, as well as starting the Teen Period Advocacy Initiative, Cycle Alliance. Rakisha fights all insults that graphic novels are not real books. Thank you, Rakisha. Panelists will be discussing the importance of a robust graphic novels collection for readers of all ages, the importance of the inclusive sex education in public libraries and schools, and much more. Let's enjoy Denny, Corey, and Rakisha's conversation. Thank you to all.
First of all, Corey and Rakisha, just thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today to talk about something that we're all quite passionate about. And I guess that leads me into my first question for you two, which is basically, how did you start to develop a passion for comics and sex ed? And feel free to mention a little more about your work with the audience as well, if you'd like. I guess Corey, if you'd
Oh.
like to start. Sorry.
No, I was going to say Rakisha should start because I don't know her answer, and I know mine. So it's Fiona Smith is the answer, and probably many people on the call will be familiar with her work. She's a long-standing painter and comic maker, and I met her a long time ago when I was working at Come As You Are. Because her work has always been, her work has always been sexual, and also about bodies, and always quite feminist, and also very much for adults. And when I wanted to start working on this series, the first book we made together was a picture book, and Fiona's getting love in the chat. And so, and I'll share the story that at first she said no because apparently babies are hard to draw, and I don't know if this is I don't know if this is a comic illustrator thing but then she figured it out. She cracked the baby code, and she agreed. But from the very first, I mean, our picture book, which is called What Makes a Baby, which is a very classic, like 32-page picture book with like very few words, it still has a real kind of comics a feel to it because of Fiona, because of her style. And I just saw right away the way how both young people and adults connected, and how it was just, there's so much anxiety about sex, about talking about sex. And these days, for those of us who work in this world, like librarians and teachers, there's also the fact that it's not that safe to do, right? That we will be targeted. And so right away, what you want is, in the same way that like when I'm teaching, I have a way of making people welcome. And in the same way that librarians you can do it in person. The way that I think we do it in a book is by making it comics, honestly. Like, it's just such a welcoming reading experience. So that's really that. So it was Fiona who was the influence, but I just saw as soon as I started interacting with readers, I saw both with kids and with adults how it allowed them to look at this material and just kind of ease into it, even though they're coming to this material with a lot of fear and uncertainty. So that's my kind of early experience.
Thank you so much, Corey. And Rakisha, I'd love to hear your answer as well about how you got into this.
Well, it's a lot of intertwining roads. I guess originally, if I go back to my origin story, and excuse my conversational tone, in my group of friends in college when we were freshmen, I was the first one to lose my virginity, so everyone came to me for sex. and then when I became a mother and I started working at the library, because they both happened at the same time, I had made a conscious choice as a parent to be very positive in my conversations with my children about their body, and talking about sex and sexuality, and making it inclusive, because as librarians and library workers that work with children, because I work in the youth wing at my library, which is from toddlers all the way up to teens, we try to make it an inclusive space. And, not only for like physical inclusivity, but also sexual orientation, gender presentation. So we had to take a lot of professional development workshops on how to be welcoming. Because some people, especially if you're an older librarian, this is all new for them. And for me, even though I'm close to 50, but when I started working at the library 17 years ago, we were considered like the youngsters. This is more comfortable for us. And during my early years in the library, what ended up happening was parents would come to the desk in the spring, always in April. I don't know what it is about spring, asking for puberty books for their daughters. Never for the boys, always for the daughters. And the fathers would be stumbling and bumbling and tripping over the words, and very uncomfortable. The mothers, they didn't really have the right language, but they were more determined. And I kind of like made it clear, like, it shouldn't be uncomfortable, because it's a natural thing. And so what I just started to do, I just started putting puberty and growing up books on the reference desk as a display. So when anybody came to the desk, they could just see them, of course there were giggles and laughs and pointing, but you have the flustered parent or guardian coming to the reference desk like, I need a book on that book right there behind you. I need that book. And so as my daughter, my daughters, my children they're my daughters. As they started to grow up and ask more questions, I started to inform myself more, started going to more professional development workshops, like at organizations like in New York City, like Planned Parenthood and the LGBT Center. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I consider myself pretty forward thinking and informed, but I'm still not as informed as I could be. And I'm still have a level of discomfort talking to my children. So combined with that and that parents coming in and asking for puberty books were clearly uncomfortable, well, maybe I should bring this issue into the youth wing. And so I started taking more like training workshops and started offering puberty and sex ed workshops for tweens and teens. And for us, that was like tweens of basically middle school and up. And, we gave it all sorts of very euphemistic names so people wouldn't get too upset, like, oh my God, sex class. But that's what it ended up being about. And that's how I got started, maybe like five years ago now, however long 2017 was ago, a century ago.
Oh man, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I guess like I really like some more thoughts from both of you on kind of what makes comics such a powerful educational tool to teach sex ed compared to like say like other mediums. Like do you have kind of more thoughts on that? Maybe we can Corey, if you'd like to start.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I preemptively unmuted. Yes, I mean, I do think, I think comics are, so first of all, the thing is, like we need to, there's not enough, there are not enough books about sexuality and gender and bodies for young people. We need 40 or 50 more by 40 or 50 different authors before we can even start, like, I think like, before we're in a place that isn't a place of kind of deficit. And so, why did I just start by saying that? I forget why I just shared that. But so sorry, maybe I'll figure out why I said that. But to get to your specific question, I think that comics are, well, in addition to being inviting, like, sex is this thing that everybody thinks they know and they all have feelings about. But of course, it's a giant thing. The way that both Rakisha and I work, and because we've talked before, I can say this, like, to us, sex is obviously, it's not intercourse. It's not even the doing parts, right? Sex includes gender. Sex includes dating and crushes. Sex includes all of this stuff. And that is the stuff that young people are actually more interested in. And so when I say young, my most recent book is for kind of puberty age kids also. So of course, when they get older, they're interested in the mechanics as well. But that's, the mechanics are not what most young people want to know about. But nonetheless, we all enter it with this idea. And the thing that's so great about comics is that it's such a complicated, this is the wrong word, but it's such a rich experience because of course you're reading and seeing at the same time, right? So you open a page. So in our book, I can say, we have all this text about menstruation, but to see this page of Fiona's illustrations, where you're seeing people having all different kinds of feelings, right? Just like there's a bunch of illustrations where like she uses like little like electric lines to kind of convey the idea of cramping, and it's just another layer, right? So to say, this is what cramping is like, this is why it happens, that's fine, but particularly for young people who haven't experienced it yet, it feels very alien. So as an educator, like certainly my experience is that if I'm in a room, if I start talking about physical changes with puberty to a room full of kids, none of whom are experiencing those changes, and maybe they don't have older siblings, it's not useful. It goes over their head or through their ears. Like it doesn't connect with them. Comics allow you, having the visual part of it kind of just, it's a different kind of connection, it's a different kind of learning. And so I think it also, the other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, is like, I think it also complicates it's helpful because, in fact, I think learning about sex is confusing, right? And certainly when I'm teaching, that's one of the first things I say. It's confusing for everyone. Adults are confused about sex, and that's not what kids are told, right? Kids are told by the time you're 18, you never think of, you've got it all figured out, and only people under 18 are confused. The thing I like about comics is that they can be confusing, like they're multi-layered and they're multi-level. And so for me as an educator, it's very useful because if I am creating curriculum off a comic, I can just go so much deeper than when I'm creating curriculum off a book that is primarily text with maybe a few spot illustrations. So that's that for me. I think it kind of, it works particularly well. And I think that's probably true for other topics that are kind of social taboos. Like I don't know for sure, but I bet it's true for grief. And I bet it's true for violence also. These other things that we don't quite know how to talk about.
Thank you so much for your answer, Corey. It was really wonderful. Rakisha, is there anything that you would like to add to that? I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, so I would like to add this gem about young adult nonfiction graphic novels. The sales of that genre has actually increased by 30% since 2020. So there is clearly a desire for them and a need for them. And as Corey was saying, it's because the words and the images work together, even in a nonfiction graphic novel, to create a meaning without having to pour through pages and pages of dense text. Comics can be learning tools because it does make the information easier to relate to because of the colors, the spatial awareness, and even like the body language of the characters, if you're using humanoid characters or animals, however, whatever creatures you're using in the comic book, the graphic novels, and also graphic novels, comics, sequential panel books, however you want to call it. The format is just less threatening. For every reader, whether it's an early reader, English as a second learner, a teenager, it's less threatening than a traditional book. And when it comes to reading about or teaching about a subject like sex and sexuality that is filled with so many heavy emotions for both the presenter and the reader, and even filled with controversy, right? A non-threatening approach is always much better. It brings comfort. And also, I think what it does, it makes seemingly abstract concepts like gender identity or the sexuality spectrum easier to grasp in a visual sense. You have the visions and not the visions, I mean the visuals, and your characters and it's discussing it. And also it can be also a low pressure way to introduce like key concepts like the menstrual cycle and the reproduction cycle. Because if you think about like biology books or just not regular nonfiction books, it's text, graph, text. And and it's like you're just absorbing words and you don't really get an idea of what things look like and how it works, etc. And like I'll give an example, like 2 years ago, excuse me, I do virtual sex ed workshops, and this one was just dedicated about the menstrual cycle, right? And like some of the participants didn't know why it was called a cycle, and and some really didn't have even though they took biology, right? These were kids who were in academically strong schools, still didn't have a quite concept of what the reproductive organs that they had looked like and how they function or how they work. They just knew the words. They didn't have the pictures or the understanding of it. And I think graphic novels with characters that you can relate to, explaining this makes it all, makes the experience, a learning experience much richer. And almost, if you're of the opposite gender or if you have the opposite genitalia, you have more empathy because you're interacting with a character who's going through these things and explaining these things. So that's why I think graphic novels and comics are really great for teaching sex ed.
Thank you so much. Oh,
Can I add
yes.
something? I want to
Yes.
say, so I have noticed there is one group that I think, and it's like a subpopulation that actually is uncomfortable with comics, and that is often like adults who didn't read comics when they were kids. And this is something that I think is really useful that I tell parents is it's perfect because what you can do with your kid is if you I mean, it's important to look through these books yourself first and take in the information. Try not to get confused when you're like, I don't know what's going on. Just read the text. But then when you're reading with your kid, you can ask them, you can say, why is this person looking that way? Or how am I supposed to read this page? Because of course, most of us who work with kids know that kids love teaching us things. And so it's actually, so again and again, because it's sex and because all like kids are constantly being told they don't know anything and adults know a lot, reading comics with your kid or with a kid can be quite equalizing, because the thing is that if the kid is a comic reader, they already have, like, it's fascinating. Like I have a almost 8-year-old, and their capacity to read comics is much better than mine. And just, they look in certain ways. So I wanted to share that. And then I wanted to share an interesting example that would be like, we don't have time, but for a discussion about, like, I agree with what Keisha's saying about how comics can humanize this kind of dense biomedical material. And so the book, people might know the book Human Body Theater, which is a graphic novel, or it's it's a graphic novel basically, but it's an entire anatomy book, from from bones to skin, I guess. And it is interesting because it gets quite dense, but it still uses this very thin narrative of a skeleton that's kind of your host. So I think that people, what's so great is that comic makers are pushing this and really that's really just an adaptation of an anatomy book. And I think that there are parts where I see readers getting a little bored when it gets into the weeds about cells. But even so, there's still there's always these little narratives, I'm going to forget all the name. I'm going to say bulgogi, but that's actually food. There's the Golgi body, right? There's these parts of cells, and they're kind of humanized in a way, or they're anthropomorphized. So I just think it's interesting that what's great is that we're comic makers are doing they know what's going on, and they're doing more and more of this. And I think that it's always going to be this balance about, because the other thing that comics do, I don't know how you make a comic without telling some kind of story, whereas all the textbooks, they don't care about story, right? They're just their goal is to communicate, this is how a uterus works, right? So yeah.
And almost to piggyback on what Corey was saying, I don't know how many people here like to read manga, but they're fiction manga, but they tell real information about sex ed and the human body. One is called Cells at Work, which is both a graphic novel and also now an anime, and one that just came out of, I don't know when it came out in Japan, but it just came out in the United States maybe less than a year ago. And it's called Sex Ed. Well, I just realized you can't see it because of my screen. But the graphic novel is called Sex Ed 120%. And basically it's about a young teacher at a girls' school who is teaching her students about all the different aspects of sex and sexuality. It's it's kind of cute, and it has these scenarios, but also the backstory, or the secondary story, is that the teacher herself is discovering that she's bisexual. So she's going on this journey of realizing that, she thought sexual, even though she's teaching it very she's being inclusive and not everything is fixed, but she actually felt that her sexuality was fixed, and so she's realizing it's not. So that's the story that you kind of follow along with while you're absorbing this information. So I think that is really a good way so you can have both the biomedical information and also a story at the same time.
Yeah, I want to also, since we're mentioning books, like and this is this weird thing about sex ed, and I don't know like where librarians can fit in to help this, but sex ed gets compartmentalized as a thing, right? Which actually does a disservice to everyone and everything, because of course sex is just part of our lives, and these questions, when we think about sex as being about crushes and about who we want to be with and about our relationships, we know that it's not just this thing that we learn about separate. In the same way that like you might have a class on religion, but if you're a religious person or if you're a spiritual person, it's part of who you are. So the other, I mean, another book that I love so much is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki. Yes, good. It's a full disclosure, Mariko's a friend, but also it's just an unbelievable book, and it is such a useful tool for someone else is saying for sex educators, because it basically shows a very messed up relationship, but in this way that is very human, right? And also there's some stuff about abortion in it and body a lot about body autonomy. So to me, it's like I think it's sex education. Now, of course, it's marketed as a graphic novel, young adult graphic novel, and it's fiction. But it is to me, it's so much more useful than, in fact, a lot of the because I'm a sex educator, I see a lot of curriculum about like healthy relationships. It's not the curricula is not great. It is boring. It does not connect with kids' lives. I would use a book like Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me 100 times over a lot of the curriculum that I'm sometimes put in front of. So I think actually part of what we can be talking about here, and it is like, how do we start making these lists bigger, right? How do we, which I think also would be helpful for parents who, again, like, I mean, it's complicated because they think they're coming for one thing, right? Like Rakisha, when you talk about like the nervous dad or mom coming for like the book, it's like, I don't think they know exactly, like they think they know what they're looking for. But I would say like, what you're looking for is a way to start having conversations with your kid about being human as they get older, right? Like that's what you're looking for. It doesn't have to be a puberty book. So it is still very compartmentalized. That's also the publishing industry, right? I mean, they do that, and I guess they have to, I guess, but but I'm glad to hear. Rakisha, I hadn't heard of either of those books, so I'm totally going to check out those two manga books. And yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much to both of you for, this dialogue. Like, I think so much of what you shared is like really, really important to talk about in this kind of conversation. And I feel like it really shows, like how dynamic comics as a resource can be, but at the same time, like, I do want to be mindful of time because I want to leave some room for Q&A from our audience, but I did want to ask, comics do still challenge a lot of our traditional ideas of what's considered like proper educational material, and that can be a real source of contention when adding them to our classrooms and library collections, especially when they cover topics that are kind of a little more taboo, like sex ed. So I guess I'm not sure what either of you might have experienced in this, but like, what do you think are the best ways to deal with challenges to these comics in libraries and classrooms? Like, for example, Rakisha, I'd really love to hear your perspective on this.
Okay, well, first of all, I think what ends up happening, people hear the phrase graphic novels, and even if it's a nonfiction topic, they automatically just think it's fiction and made up. So they're already a little afraid of it. Not afraid of it, they dismiss it. And like in my grandmother's age, well, my grandma's 92, but my grandmother and my mother, my parents' age, they always used to refer to comic books as funnies. So just like, little things that you read and throw away, like chewing gum. So you have to let them know now that comics now that come in this graphic novel format is just like a traditional book. At the very least, they're bound with pages, right? They're full of information, they're full of text. Some of them have back matter, some of them have indexes, and they all, they have the same key components of a traditional novel or nonfiction book. And also, you stress how graphic novels are really helpful, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, in building strong readers and reading comprehension. And I give them 3 examples. One, graphic novels can help if your child or you're a reader who has ADHD, like my daughter. She was recently diagnosed last year, and she just turned 17. Her reading homework was a struggle because she had to read all this text and then write about it, but she would prefer graphic novels because that held her attention more, because it didn't have all the words and she could make inference from the pictures. But the teachers didn't want her to use graphic novels. So she stopped loving reading. But now that she's diagnosed and on medicine, she can build her reading stamina again and enjoy reading using graphic novels. And because graphic novels is more than just comic strip funnies, she's reading classics for school. I mean, I don't even like to use the word classics, but classics for school like Frankenstein and Jane Eyre, and it's like not a problem for her. You also have teens with dyslexia or other educational learning disabilities, where again, reading a book with nothing but text and expecting them to absorb all the information, make sense of all those words, and then make inferences and give it a proper literature review, you're kind of almost setting the kid up for failure because you're not taking it into account that is, that they're neurodivergent, and that is not going to be their way of thinking. And also the very old fashioned, some kids and some readers are just visual learners. Pictures help them learn faster than just word after word after word after word. They lose concentration while interacting with a page. But with pictures and comic strips and sequential panels, they're interacting with the page, and there's an easier time of putting complex words and themes into context that they couldn't if they were just reading a traditional book. And that's usually what we really fight with parents about. At the library, especially in the young adult specialists and children's specialists, we are all pro graphic novels. So we're always pushing graphic novels. And when parents come in and say they need, we were like, no, they need to read. That's period. There's no like they need to read a certain type of book. What you want is a child that's going to read, because it's going to build the vocabulary, it's going to build their reading stamina, and it's going to be building their reading confidence. And once you have a child who has good reading stamina and good reading confidence, then if they have to pick up a traditional book, it's not going to feel as daunting. And because I'm a mom who has 2 kids, and any parent that gives me pushback, okay, so I'm a little bit of a bully, a little bit of a bully. So anybody it was like, well, when you get into, I was like, listen, parent, guardian, I started reading comic books when I was 8 years old. I still read comic books right now. I have a master's degree. I got a scholarship to get a master's degree. So are comics bad? And then I just leave it like that. And then then it's up to the parents' choice. I can't beat them up. I metaphorically beat them up. I would never physically beat up a parent or guardian or any library patron.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Thank you so much, Rakisha. Yeah, I would like to just take some time to see what questions the audience might want to ask and send your way. So I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Let's see. I am not really seeing. Oh, there we go. Oh, yes. Okay, so I have a question. Hi, I'm Carol, and I teach a grade 4/5 class. And do you have any comics that you can recommend on like hygiene during puberty, menstruation, etc.? Oh, and yes, I guess like book recommendations in general beyond like maybe what we've talked about already.
I actually do. I did create a book list last night, um, and I can go copy and paste it in the chat, or anybody can email me for it. But off the top of my head, I cannot think of hygiene hygiene during puberty graphic novel. Probably maybe one of Corey's books, not the newest one, the second one. But
No,
I
no.
do.
The newer, no, it's the newer one. So there is, yeah, in
Okay.
Unisex, which has just come out, there's absolutely stuff about hygiene. I mean, it's an interesting question about hygiene during puberty, because again, as an educator, I want to rephrase that for parents in a way around like, how do we take care of our bodies as they change? Because there's a lot, because the way that a lot of traditional sex education and a lot of the books do it is that they kind of just assume that everyone's embarrassed by their bodies, right? So the assumption is, if you have a wet dream, you're going to be embarrassed by it. If you have a body with a penis and it gets an erection, it's embarrassing. The truth is, many people will experience that as embarrassing, but other people don't. Same way with like menstruation. When I was when Fiona and I were preparing to write this book, reading through all the period books, they all just make this assumption, for example, that that people are uncomfortable with blood and also with smell. But I know this because I spend time with kids all the time, and then we ended up doing a little survey to get some input for the book. There were lots of people who were like, actually, I find blood fascinating, and I think the smell is really cool. And also, of course, there's some people who don't have the same kind of sense of smell, right? So for some people, it's actually an access issue where they don't actually have a very strong sense of smell. And so in fact, they actually don't know, this would be a piece about like taking care of your body. They don't know when they've been wearing a pad for too long because they are not aware of that smell. And that's just like sort of a difference around disability and stuff. So anyway, in our book, we sort of do have like one of the things that there's many things we're happy with, but we actually have a whole page on discharge, vaginal fluid, which is a fascinating thing because, of course, anyone who has a vulva and a vagina, you start having discharge at a very young age, but pre-puberty, and nobody talks about it, right? And it's the weirdest thing. Like you teach your kid about like when your nose drips and what to do, and you teach your kid like, I mean, kids see people like drying their eyes if they cry. But there's this like fluid that no one talks about. So we do in Unisex, there's a page about that. There's a whole page about kind of menstrual products, which is a different than a lot of the other books in that it's kind of critical. I mean, it says like, you're going to figure out what you're going to figure out and different things will be useful. But a lot of books end up sort of basically pushing tampons and also not pointing out that there's reusable options. Like a lot of the books don't point out that like, there's this thing, if you want to know what your body's doing, there's products, and then you get to see what your body's doing. If you don't want to know what your body's doing, then for example, like a high absorbency tampon is going to be better than a menstrual cup, for example, or even a pad. So Unisex has that. It's a giant book. So it's the way that a lot of educators are using it is that they just like, they'll take a couple pages out of it. But I agree. I don't know with Rakisha, there's not another graphic novel that I can think of.
No.
Off the top of my head, but I will think about it.
Yeah, and in the chat, someone mentioned go with the flow, and I second go with the flow. I actually spoke to the illustrator and the author of that graphic novel because it was just being published when I was developing my curriculum for my menstrual advocacy program, and that was one of the books that we gave away when we were having the workshops. But I would say, okay, so here's my feeling. I feel like books about menstruation and puberty are sometimes too gendered. Like one is geared towards girls, one is geared towards boys, and I think that does a disservice to children who may be bigender who may be trans. And I also think you're starting to set up that boys' bodies are mysteries for, girls and girl presenting, and that girls' bodies and periods are like, oh, mystery, only girls and need to know about it. So I try to break, that stigma that it's either or. I feel like it should be together. So there are a lot of puberty books and menstruation books out there, which is very geared towards one gender, and it's heavily towards girls because they focus a lot on breast development and the menstrual cycle. But and so with that caveat, I like the book The Care and Keeping of You. I think that's named by American Girl. Especially the volume 1, which is for younger readers. They use a lot of illustrations and colors for talking about specifically about quote unquote hygiene. And as Corey was saying, like some people have different levels of like hygiene tolerance. And again, and I make this joke about my kids all the time. They are my living social experiment. My youngest daughter, it's so funny. She can smell when you have your period, but when it's time for her to change a pad or anything, it's just like, Jamie, how long have you? Oh, you didn't hear that name. Squishy, how long have you been sitting on this couch? You've been sitting on this couch for like 12 hours, and I haven't seen you move yet. Maybe you should go handle some business. Oh yeah. So it's a different sensibility. But I guess right now hygiene is the best word we have. But so I've never really seen any books that really, talk about it in a way where they're not making people feel embarrassed by their body or their smell or the body function.
I want to also mention a book which is Autism Friendly Guide to Periods, which is Robin Pollard, or I'm sure that Lauren, who's doing a great job of putting things in, is going to find it and share it with everyone. It's interesting, so because it's written by someone who's autistic, and so it is Robin Stewart. Thank you, Patricia Stewart. So it's kind of made in a more accessible format in terms of like focusing on concentration. It's also nice that it's actually, so it's not the cover is illustrated, but there's photos, right? Which is also this thing is like people like, so in our book, and I should say that all of our menstruation, the entire menstruation chapter is it kind of takes gender out. It works for any kind of gender and any kind of body, right? So it doesn't say periods happening to girls, or it doesn't do any of that. And same with the anatomy part. So that's the book is written by a genderqueer person, and so it's all very genderqueer. But people probably know this, like there's this thing about the blood, right? That people, if you don't tell young people who haven't experienced it, and maybe they live in a home where they haven't seen anyone, then they imagine this kind of like bright red, they imagine a blood that like looks like it runs out of a cut, and they imagine it might come out that way. So in our book, again, like because it's a full color comic, we can do that. We can talk about what the blood, the color of the blood, what it looks like, how often people mistake it for something else. But the cool thing about Robin's book is that there's photos, and they're not. I mean, they maybe border on a bit clinical, but for some kids that would be really great. So that's just another resource. And I don't know if I'm gonna now ask a question, which is like, there's so much stuff going on in the chat. It'd be great to be able to, I'm not taking notes, but I'm seeing so many other people referencing things. I wonder if there's is there a way of sharing this chat with everybody so we can all have that?
I think when they record like calls like this, it actually gives a transcript of the chat that we can look back on later. So hopefully we'll be able to look into that. But just in the interest of time, I know we have a little under 5 minutes. And 4 minutes now, and I know that we have to probably end right at 2:50. I do apologize for not being able to get to the other questions. They were mostly about additional book recommendations, say for like older audiences, or more trans or gender neutral kind of sex ed books. But I think a lot of what the titles that were covered and that will be shared on Rakisha's list will be very appropriate for that. So in the meantime, I just want to thank both of you again for just taking the time to share with us today. And I want to know if there was anything just like, current or upcoming things that you want to talk about before we end the session. I guess you can start. Oh, Rakisha, okay, sure.
Oh, I mean, well, first off, Corey, let's see, what is going on? Well, Corey and I are speaking again in July, and also I will be my period initiative is called Cycle Alliance, and we're doing a Pride period product giveaway on June 30th. So anytime where I can give away menstrual products, I give them away at the library, and these period kits. And one of the tenets of the Cycle Alliance is that menstruation is gender inclusive or gender neutral. So I figured, why not, Pride would be the perfect time to do a distribution. So that's coming up. And if anyone's in Brooklyn on June 30th, please come to the Central Branch of the Brooklyn Public Library.
Rakisha, if people want to know about the Cycle Alliance, is there a quick, did you already give a URL if people want to know more?
You know what, I'm going to have everyone email me, because the information on our website has to be updated. And unfortunately, I'm not allowed to go in and update it myself.
Rakisha, can you share your email in the chat? I just shared mine.
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
Yeah.
And I will also put it in the Cycle Alliance, what I would call I can't even think of the word. I'll put in the pitch page, because originally I had to pitch it and people had to vote on it. And so that gives you more insight into what it is. If you give me just a moment.
Thank you so much. Just a gentle reminder that we only have a minute or so left. I wasn't sure if you want to share something real quick before we had to end the panel.
No, I'll say thank you to the person who just pointed out I was sending texts, not to the whole people. So I just gave my email address. Rakisha and I, where we're talking, it's for the Association of Children's Librarians of Northern California. So it's going to be a 2-hour kind of conversation about this stuff, and people can sign up somehow. And I'll just say, yeah, if people, particularly if you're looking for resources, you can email me anytime. Part of my job is just to connect with people and help find resources. So feel free to be in touch. And thanks for coming.
Yep, the same. You can email me. I'm on Twitter. I have a professional Twitter now, so you can contact me there. And feel free to email me. It's just the fastest way. I probably will give you way too much information because I am a librarian. But but I'm amongst peers, so you understand.
And if there's a way to share the chat with all of us, I mean, I'll just be personal and selfish. If you can send the chat to me, I'd love to be able to look at all those resources.
Same.
Okay. Thanks, Denny.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, thank you both. Like, man, so happy that we've been able to kind of share like this. So excited to like share the resources in the chat. But yeah, thank you everyone today. And I hope you have a wonderful kind of rest of your day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the programming for Libraries and Education Day.
I will. Have a good one, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that feature presentation for TCAF 2022. Before we go, I'd like to once again thank our programming sponsor, Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Art Council, and the Toronto Art Council for their generous support. Special thanks, of course, to the Beguiling Books and Art. I hope you enjoyed the time. Thank you so much for it, and we'll see you again soon.